I'd like to welcome everybody to the Legal and Finance Committee for the City of Rapid City for April 16, 2014. The first order of business will be the roll call and the determination of a quorum. Here. Thank you. Next order of business with the adoption of the agenda. Do we have anything to add or delete from the agenda? I have no. Second. Motion by Nordstrom, second by Laurenti. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Now it's time for general public comment. It's a time for the public to discuss or express concerns to the council on any item not on the agenda. Action will not be taken at the meeting on any issue not on the agenda except by placement on the agenda by unanimous vote of the council members present. Do I have anybody who wishes to speak on any item not currently on the agenda? You're already down for texting, the texting ban? Yeah, that item is actually on the agenda. No, that's fine, no problem. Anybody else wish to speak on anything else? Okay, moving on from general public comment, I'm now going to move on to consent items numbers 1 through 14. I have no speaker request forms for consent items numbers 1 through 14. Does anybody wish to speak on any of those items? I have no. Going forward, I'm going to close public comment on items 1 through 14, and I'm going to go look to see if anybody wants to remove any consent items from consent calendars 1 through 14. None have none of those. Anybody wish to make a motion? We have a motion to approve the consent calendar by Doyle, second by Wright. Any further comment? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, now we're on to item number public comment, for non-consent items. I'm looking at items 15 through 19. I have Mr. Robbie Roll, wishes to speak on item number 18, the texting ordinance. Sir, you have the podium's right over there. If you would step up to the podium, and you have this green light, gives you 3 minutes, and at 30 seconds, you need to start wrapping up your comments, please. And if you just identify yourself and where you're from, for the record, please.
Right here, appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
My name's Robbie Roll. I'm an attorney here in town. I work for Demersman, Jensen, Tellinghausen, and Huffman. Just a couple concerns I request your consideration on regarding making this a primary offense. Now, first of all, the goal of this ordinance is public safety from distracted drivers. And if that's what the goal is, why are individuals still allowed to read books in their car? Why can they write emails in their car? Why can they eat in their car? Why can they talk to people in their car? The ordinance isn't tailored towards actually meeting that goal. And the point that I'm trying to make is that this ordinance originates with law enforcement, and it's written in a way that allows law enforcement unfettered access into a vehicle. Just because you get pulled over and you weren't texting doesn't mean that the stop wasn't lawful. The officer can simply state, I thought I saw him texting, and that justifies the stop by law. That's reasonable suspicion. So I know a lot of this has already been debated, but I urge you to consider the way that the ordinance is actually written, and just to make sure that you understand what we're giving up rights-wise if we actually do end up passing that ordinance. And I just ask for your consideration on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have no more speaker request forms for items number 18 or 15 through 19. Does anybody else wish to speak on any of those items? No one appearing. I'm going to close public comment on the non-consent items 15 through 19 and go on to number 15, which is the Rushmore Plaza Civic Center forum schedule from Donovan Broberg, ARC International. And I would entertain a motion or recognize Charity Noel, please.
I'll make a motion to acknowledge.
Motion to acknowledge by Doyle, second by Laurenti. Any further discussion? Just for the public's information, this is just a schedule of the forums that will be held on the Rushmore Plaza Civic Center, renovations possibly. So any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. On next to item number 16, which is the request from the Rushmore Plaza Civic Center, Board of Directors for monies not to exceed $50,000 for an additional wheelchair accessibility in the Barnett Arena. I have no motions or Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Chair. I will move to approve the motion to not to exceed $50,000. And if I get a second, I'd like to retain the floor.
Do you have a revenue source?
That's my question.
Okay. So the motion is to not to exceed $50,000, second by Laurenti. Further discussion, Jerry, or Rich, you still have the floor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I can call Mr. Bailey as Chair of the Civic Center Board.
Sure, Mr. Jeff Bailey, please step to the board, microphone and identify yourself.
Good afternoon.
Good day, Mr. Bailey. Could you help me out understanding where this $50,000 is coming from? Again, I want to just kind of emphasize I'm okay with the project moving forward, but I'd just like to get...
Somebody owes us a lot of donuts. I'd like to commend you on your ringer, sir.
I apologize.
That's fine.
That's okay. We're hungry for donuts anyway. So, Jeff, if you could, or excuse me, Mr. Bailey, if you could help us understand how this or where this $50,000 is going to be. Number one, where it's coming from, how it's going to be utilized, and I do have another follow-up question.
Certainly. The need arose because of an event that was held at the Civic Center in the Don Barnett Arena, Monster Truck Show, where a patron, there was not sufficient wheelchair seating, and subsequently a patron had to be lifted and carried up to be seated. And so because of this, we were asked to or requested to explore options for expanding the seating for these types of events. And so the mayor came to a board meeting of the Rushmore Plaza Civic Center and requested that we prioritize that, give it top priority to move ahead, and that the funds would be identified. And it was our understanding at that point that they might be capital improvement funds, CIP funds. And so we proceeded to work with Public Works to analyze the situation and identify areas that could be to help to mitigate, and we subsequently came up with a plan to install a wheelchair lift. Again, this will be a temporary Band-Aid fix. It will expand that seating area with some other adjustments, including bar heights and other type of things. Subsequent discussion to this also came up with maybe there were other funding options, including that the monies could come back from the Civic Center's budget itself. And so our request today is following along with the original discussion held at our board meeting where it was identified that the potential funding source could be the CIP.
It'll be out of the Civic Center's CIP, or is just strictly out of the? Thank you, folks. I'm just trying to make sure everybody understands where the funding source is coming from.
Right. Our request today is that it would be that the council determine whether the CIP would be the appropriate, the city's CIP be the appropriate source for those funds for the $50,000.
Thank you. And then I apologize for getting down in the weeds on this next question, but the chair lift itself, is that going to be a one that is attached to the stairwell or the stairway, and then the people will be lifted up through that process?
Indeed. It would be, if you're aware of where the current arrangement is for wheelchair seating, it would be directly to the back and above that. What our intent would be is to collapse the bleachers there and identify alternate sites. And the lift would be right in front. It would lift up, and then folks could move to the back of that elevated platform.
Thank you. And then you've got how many other projects that are behind this, or shall I say violations that have been cited down there?
Oh, well, the report that was conducted, actually we hired Forefront here in town to conduct an ADA review. And they subcontracted with a specialized company out of Colorado Springs. That's all they do is evaluation for Americans with Disabilities Act compliance. There were 406 potential violations identified, and then the itemized list, and all of this, of course, has been is attached to today's agenda of this meeting, and also has been available on the www.gotmine.com, the Civic Center website for a couple of years now. I believe it's a year and a half. It analyzes and identifies all the 406 items, and then there's a cost projection for mitigation of all of those items as well.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. Chair, if I may ask a question of the Finance Office, Pauline Sumption.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Of course.
Pauline, the CIP has been identified as one potential source, and I'd like to get your feedback on the potential source of the CIP funds versus the Civic Center providing the funding source for this.
Technically, the CIP fund has never been intended for purposes for those enterprise funds that are able to generate their own revenues to cover their costs. If there have been improvements that need to be made for those types of facilities, whether it's water, sewer, we've done a bond issue before for the Civic Center for improvements. We usually go through that bond process or through the Vision Fund to do something like that. Or in the case of utilities, they also have the Utility Support Fund for some other funding options. I will say typically that is used, the CIP fund is used for the general fund needs, such as government buildings, street improvements, parks improvements, IT infrastructure type things. In some cases with the government buildings or government facilities, we have also done improvements at the cemetery or also at the golf courses because they cannot typically historically generate funds on their own to cover those. So typically this is not somewhere where I would look to fund something of this nature. However, the council gets the final vote. I don't.
Thank you, Pauline. I appreciate the education and the orientation on how the CIP is used as well. And thank you, Mr. Bailey. Appreciate your comments too. Yield the floor.
Chair recognizes Alderman Jerry Wright.
I think the funding, if it's not available from the Civic Center, should come from us somehow. But I have another, I think, more basic question. Is we're kind of doing a little spot fix of many problems. And if we, is that wise? And we're preparing to fix them all. And if we do this, I have one safety concern, and that is if we use this device to place people that are in a wheelchair or other device or can't move on their own power into a location over, say, a half hour pre-show time, and we get a number of people in that area. If there were an emergency to evacuate, how would we evacuate them? I think that's problematic, and I think that by doing this, we're creating a problem. And would you like to comment on that? And I think it's a nice attempt to do something, but I think it's probably creating a bigger problem than we want.
Mr. Brian Molesky, please.
Thank you. Brian Molesky, General Manager of the Rushmore Plaza Civic Center. Alderman Wright, I think you bring a good point forward, and we have looked at what to do with all of the Americans with Disability Act issues that we have. As our board chairman has indicated, we have 402 violations of the Americans with Disability Act that we've identified. We know it's going to cost somewhere between $37 and $40 million just for those violation mitigation corrections. There's another 31 million out there for all the building code violations we have. I have some of the same concerns that if we cherry pick a few of these to try to correct, what does it do with the other violations? One of the issues I have is that I want to take care of all of our customers. I don't care what their age is, what their gender is. I don't care what their background is, what their color is. None of that matters to me. On the other hand, the ultimate responsibility of myself and my staff is the safety of thousands and tens of thousands of people when they come into our facility. In the case of our ADA patrons, if they're all located in one spot, in some ways that helps me to take care of them because they're in one location. And in another way, it actually makes it worse because I have to concentrate an inordinate amount of personnel into one small isolated location. Because truly, the first thing that happens in a fire emergency, or one of the first things that could happen in a fire emergency, is all the electricity goes off. If the electricity goes off, you cannot use lifts, you cannot use elevators, you can't use any of that. So I have to have people in place to carry out those folks in a wheelchair, or people who are not mobile enough to use for themselves to use the stairs. So I have to have people in place to take care of them. If I have a large amount of people in one place going down one set of stairs, being carried down one set of stairs, I also have some concern with that. The Americans with Disability Act requires disbursement throughout the facility, up and down, sideways, on the floor, in the balconies, where what we have been attempting to do so far is to put them in one isolated place. I'm not an ADA expert. I can tell you it does cause me some pause to add even more folks into one isolated location. And I would certainly be open to maybe bringing an ADA expert in and saying, really, do we want to do this? Do we want to fix this one isolated issue? Or do we need to wait and fix them all at one time? So I apologize, it was a little lengthy in my response, Alderman.
No, it's fine. That's my concern. The $50,000 is pocket change. And that's not being irresponsible, but I think it's a fair request. But I just think that we're complicating the issue and possibly creating more problems than solving it. I think we need to have as you say, a contingency plan for how we exist. We have to accept some shortcomings because they are pre-existing. There's not much we can do about it. And we're moving forward through the design and discussion process to address those issues. And I do feel by taking on one issue, we may be complicating and creating problems we don't want. So I'm holding my judgment on, actually, Civic Center, if you decide to put it in, that's your call. But I would advise anyone not doing it for the consideration I just brought forth. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Alderman Steve Laurenti.
Brian, if you could entertain me there, please. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Here's my question, and I was thinking this the whole time on this agenda item, because we're not talking about general fund here when we're dealing with the Civic Center, and you guys have your own board. You're autonomous in that manner. My question here is the problem I have. I'm troubled by the fact that you're here. And I don't know if it's specifically you, but the fact of the matter is we're considering general fund dollars for an enterprise fund type of thing. So I have a big problem with that, especially in light of the fact that I assume that the Civic Center and the board, the Civic Center itself, has contingency funds for these types of things, or I would hope that they would. Can you enlighten me a little bit on that as far as the contingency funds? What you don't necessarily have to tell me the balance, but I assume that they have enough to cover these types of things, because I have a list here of prioritized equipment needs for the Civic Center, and of course they're in the millions and millions of dollars. Understand that. So if you can answer that question first, and then maybe I'm going to have a follow-up after that on the contingency funds for these types of things.
You bet. The operations of the Rushmore Plaza Civic Center have been set up such that it is normal for us to take care of our operations. It's normal for us to take care of, we do our own snow removal, we do our own lawn care. We, of course, take care of our own tables and chairs. We're in charge of taking care of that equipment, bobcats, anything like that is ours. We really do not have the wherewithal to build buildings and to do any major infrastructure improvements or alterations. That is not something that we have the funding to do, and that would be true, I think, of almost every entertainment facility within the United States. We do have, as you see in front of you, I think $10.8 million worth of identified priority lists. We have not identified $38 million worth, nor do we know how to identify which of those $38 million needs to be done first. And that's part of the reason I suppose we're here today. The mayor was at a board meeting with ourselves a couple of meetings ago, and he was there listening to some of these ADA issues. And he's been a very good proponent for us of the ADA issues. And it was his suggestion for this to come back and be looked at through the CIP funding process. Now, to his credit, he believed it was going to be about $100,000 to do this part of the mitigation. We've been able to work it down for this one piece to about $50,000, and I think that's why we're re-looking at it now. But we do not have the wherewithal to dig into that building, nor the knowledge and how to really prioritize those 402 issues that we have.
Okay, and I guess this is probably more of an observation than a question to you, but I still don't quite understand why you're coming to asking for general funds. I do from the standpoint of the mayor's suggestion, but I'm going to have a hard time approving that, knowing that you're supposed to be autonomous in that you're an enterprise fund.
Okay.
And now you're asking for general fund dollars for something that benefits the Civic Center. Because it would seem to me, not only from a safety issue, but you have, and I totally support it, that it's needed, but it's just the dollars where they're coming from that I don't support. And so, again, we're talking about disabled people who want to be able to attend these events, and I wholeheartedly support that. We should have had it years ago, as we all
Obviously,
know.
yeah.
But I'm having a hard time using the taxpayers' general fund for an enterprise fund who is supposed to be autonomous in a budget perspective, in a taking care of their own expenses perspective. So I can't support it as it's being presented today, and I'm hoping that by Monday night, the next council meeting, we have a better funding source for this particular item, whether it's coming out of contingency funds for the Civic Center, which is where I would prefer that it come from. But my last comment is really about everything that we all know, which is we have another Civic Center, or maybe we don't, and how much money are we going to throw into the wind, if you will, if the Barnett Center is deemed not viable or not going to be part of some expansion that may or may not happen. So I'm really concerned about putting thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars into a Barnett Arena that may or may not be part of the future of Rapid City. And so I understand that we have ADA compliance, that it has been ignored for a long time. It's a very difficult situation, but I would think, and I will support, if it's coming from another, of course it wouldn't be in front of us if it were coming from the Civic Center's own budget, but I can't support it as it stands today. Thank you.
You bet. One thing to answer in that is, and maybe it is coming out of the council contingency, which would be general fund. And I did not know until Pauline had pointed out that with the CIP, that generally, that's the other half of the penny that's matched with the vision fund, that the general fund belongs in the CIP and the enterprise funds belong in the vision funds, meaning that the general funds will not come into the vision funds and the vision funds will not come into the general funds. So if the CIP is considered general funds, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that if vision funds and there's the ability to drop from there, that's more palatable to me for sure than the CIP. So I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Alderwoman Cherry Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify, the 402 violations are specifically for the Barnett Arena only, correct? Okay, so that's just in that one facility. And we've already had our finance director say that we have taken CIP funds and diverted them towards enterprise funds in our city. We do it for ambulance, golf, cemetery. Just because the Civic Center hasn't made that request in the past doesn't mean that we don't do it. It definitely is how much, Brian, do we at the Civic Center put out for capital outlay a year?
The Civic Center has budgeted anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000 a year of our own operational funds that we use for capital improvement projects. We have done things like roofs, and we have done some limited parts to our parking lot, but we don't generally build buildings. We can't afford to build buildings or to do major maintenance within those buildings.
Right. And that's been one of my biggest points of confusion and contention since being on the council, going through that CIP. I think I've been on the CIP committee for the last 3 years, but we don't have a uniform way of taking care of our government buildings. Just this week, I finally heard, well, if the enterprise generates revenue, then they don't qualify for CIP funding. It's the first time in 3 years that I've heard that. Because when you look at, we do take care of our Journey Museum, that's a city facility. We take care of the Doll, that's a city facility. I would be willing to guess that those are ADA compliant facilities. Is the Journey or the Doll not revenue producing? I mean, maybe they're nonprofits, but so we take care of those facilities for people who rent those facilities from us, but we don't take care of our own city enterprise needs. When you look at the reality, the Civic Center can afford $300,000 to $500,000 of capital outlay a year. Just in my time on the council, I've seen this priority needs list go from $5 million to almost $11 million in 3 years. There's no chance that they're going to be able to get this list whittled down. It's an impossibility. And so that brings me back to the Vision Fund. Why it was originally created was for the construction of the original Rushmore Plaza Civic Center. Any addition for the facility came out of that fund. And it just befuddles me that in the past, how many decades, 3 decades, we haven't come up with a way to make sure that the funding, like it is for CIP, that this other half penny, that the monies are there to maintain this facility when the needs arise. Why not? I have a very hard time comprehending how we've let it go for 30 years. And now when you look at the 402 violations in one facility and the cost, I mean, you know, we've had the experts, we've had the consultants and the professionals tell us it is just going to be a lot better for you fiscally to start over with a new arena, make sure everything is compliant. But when we're dealing with a $50,000 temporary accommodation on this lift, you know, my mind kicks up a lot of other questions. Yes, it's great to go ahead and expend some funds to try to meet this one need, but what about the 401 other needs? Because I guarantee there's somebody out there that cares enough about each of those 401 other violations. We don't have an identified safety plan. We literally, the way the Barnett Arena is designed, those people are sitting ducks if something were to happen. It also brings to mind that the elevator is inadequate. It's a one wheelchair at a time operation, if that, even if the wheelchair can fit in. Some of the oversized ones cannot even fit into that structure. So it's not, to me, it's a lot bigger than just $50,000. And my preference would be to take this out of Vision funding. And I know we have a lot of rules and regulations in place for Vision. Nobody on the council to date has been through that 5-year process. It was done before any of us got on the council. So I would defer to our finance officer to find out how we might be able to tap into what might be there. I know we were just talking about some contingency for another project. Was it the pool? It was something. But to see what we have so that we can make sure that that Vision funding source takes care of the Civic Center when it has the needs, when those needs arise. That would just be the most obvious thing in my mind. Pauline, do you have anything for us? Thank you.
Is this where we play the Jeopardy music?
If you'd like to sing, be my guest.
While she's doing that, I'm going to recognize, you still want the floor?
Well, yeah, I'm not.
Okay. Pauline, you need a couple more minutes? Okay.
I can come back
Okay,
in.
I'll come back to you. I'll recognize Richie Nordstrom real quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'm going to come back to my original point. I support the project, but there's a lot of things that this conversation has brought up as far as questions. And I'm just kind of reminding the committee here, too, that I did not put any funding source in the motion. So if we want to carry forward to Monday night from this committee without identifying a funding source, I'm okay with that. But I'm seriously thinking that maybe even by Monday evening, I would be amending this motion to include a plan And Brian Molesky identified a comment that really struck home with me, is that we're cherry picking out of the 400 and some violations that we have, and we don't have a plan. We just don't have a plan. So I'm contemplating that we should be coming forward with a plan versus the cherry picking aspect of it. And Brian, it looks like you have a comment or a suggestion for us on that. If you please, would you, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. You know, one of the areas that the Board of Directors has been grappling with is the city has put in place a $500,000 request with local and national architects and local and national construction firms to come back and tell the City Council, here's what we believe is the right answer for the arena or a new arena or the existing arena at the Rushmore Plaza Civic Center. And obviously one of the options that the council has is to say, you know what, we're going to wait for that report to come back to us, whether that's sometime in June or July, somewhere in that time frame, and look at what that particular professional report says. Here's our suggestion as architects, engineers, and construction firms with what we think, what we suggest for the City of Rapid City to do at the Rushmore Plaza Civic Center. So I wholeheartedly appreciate the concern we have with trying to fix this one particular situation, and I wholeheartedly understand why there's some concern about what do we do with the other 401.
And I think Alderman Wright identified this current situation as perhaps even compounding the situation that we're trying to fix and making in a very important matter, we're making it worse. And so I'm hoping that the committee will amend the motion to stand by or wait till we get that report, June or July. And that's to me, that's the first step we need to do, is wait for that recommendation to come forward.
You could withdraw your motion.
I'll do that. I will withdraw my motion.
Is that okay with the seconder? Okay. The motion has now been withdrawn. And Jerry Wright, you have the floor.
No, she's
Oh,
answering.
no, sorry, Pauline. Well, she didn't chime in, so Chair recognizes Pauline Shumshin. I'm having trouble today speaking.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If the council were to request the funding for this up to $50,000 from Vision Fund, there would be ample funds to do so.
Okay.
Thank you, Pauline.
Chair, do you still have the?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question is, though, where do we draw the line? Because if we are serving more people with this lift, then we're going to have a larger draw on demand on the restrooms. We're going to have a larger draw on demand on the inadequate counter heights and everything leading up to that whole entertainment experience. And, you know, once you start looking at how everything's interconnected, there's no clear place. I'm not an ADA expert, but I can't see clearly where to draw that line. So my question for the Board of Directors, or Mr. Molesky, if I may, is would you be comfortable waiting until we get this report in June from our consultants and holding off on this issue? Or was this the mayor's priority? Is this something that we're going to have to figure out a way to do? And then again, where do we draw that line? So I guess it's a three-parter, sorry.
It is. I'd be comfortable if in 1993 this facility would have been brought up to ADA code as it should have been. We can't go back 21 years and make it ADA compliant when it should have been made ADA compliant. When it was built, there was no Americans with Disability Act. It's a very fine facility. It's built very well, and it still plays boys basketball pretty darn well. Now, there's a whole lot of other things it doesn't do well. But in my mind, it's going to take us 6 to 8 weeks to come back with getting the chairlift ordered, getting the firm hired to come in and cut down the railing heights, to order new tempered glass to put in place of the tempered glass that has to be taken out. I believe we're probably 2 months away at the earliest of having something in place, this lift or something like it in place anyway. I don't believe the council would be doing anything detrimental. In the meantime, if you waited to see what your actual report came back and said. From the standpoint of needing something in place, either a plan or the lift itself, by the start of our busy season again, which would be next September, next October, we need to have something in place. But hopefully, we would have either the plan recommendation back to the council, or we would be able to order the lift, if you would so like.
Thank you, Brian.
Chair recognizes Alderman Jerry Wright.
With a vast amount of confusion going on with this, and I think we need to discuss it later, and before it's handled, we table this issue for this time.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
A motion to table, second by Wright, second by Doyle. No discussion on a tabling motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I didn't see you.
I object to tabling it. You can't object, you guys, you can't table this item. We need to, I wanted to, sorry, I was in a meeting, I stepped out to.
Okay, since I still have the floor,
Well, I guess I didn't even see them, I didn't see the Mr. Mayor, but we can't, I know by point of order, you can't discuss a tabling motion. Is that correct, Joel?
That's correct. And let's just keep in mind, you're not tabling the installation necessarily of the lift. You're tabling the payment for it out of the CIP.
Okay.
yeah.
So that was, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I was talking to someone. Very good.
May I talk a little bit?
Well, we're not on the subject anymore. We've moved on to the next.
I'd like
Item.
to say a few words too. If there's
We're not on this item anymore, though. We're moving on. That item's been disposed of. We're now on item
Talk
number
about it at the end, Mayor.
17. Is that correct, Joel? I mean, procedurally speaking, I've disposed of the item. And there's no longer.
I mean, yeah, you could go through the process of amending or reopening or going back to the item or amending the agenda, but I mean, if you wanted to do it formally.
Okay. Chair recognizes Charity Doyle.
Then I will make the motion to reconsider.
Any further discussion on reconsideration? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. This item is now up for reconsideration. Sorry about that. Mr. Mayor, you can speak if you wish, sir. You have 3 minutes. 30 seconds is when the yellow light goes off.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for not being here earlier. I had a meeting that was listening to the conversation and something I wanted to be part of, so stepped out for a minute so I could be a part of this conversation. I wanted to just say that Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in July of 1990, and it's something that many of these issues should have been addressed long before now. We know that. We also know that Americans with Disabilities Act does not require neither the 1990 or 2010 laws require everything to be fixed all at once. What we know is that this is, I understand, Richie, your concern about this being linked to the other 405 violations, but this issue is particularly important because we've had multiple complaints on this problem. This has come up through the Mayor's Committee for Disabilities, for people with disabilities. This has come up through other channels as well. We're not sure exactly what the origins are of the Department of Justice complaint. It could be a complaint from an individual. It could also be a file that was opened in, I think, 2011 when Department of Justice was here looking at the county and other buildings. And it could have been part of a periodic review. But we know that there's a problem. I need to explain to the committee that you've probably all seen my memo by now, and perhaps it was discussed prior to me getting here today. But I wanted to explain my position on this. I went to the Civic Center board meeting, and there was a good discussion on this. And at that time, we thought we would have $3.1 million actually $2.1 million available in our capital improvements budget. So Terry Waltersdorf and I were all excited because we thought we could spend $2.1 million on chip seals and mills and overlays and all kinds of other projects that would require very little engineering, and we could do a whole bunch of residential streets this summer yet. And we thought we could also, I thought we could also fit in up to $100,000 for these important ADA improvements. As it turns out, our bids are coming in high. On average, our Public Works Director tells us that bids appear to be coming about 17% high, which thankfully isn't as high as Mount Rushmore Road came in at, but it's high nonetheless. And it looks like many of the projects on the docket for this year could eat through that $2.1 million, or at least much of it. Nonetheless, I believe that the time has come to take care of this particular wheelchair access issue. The Americans with Disabilities Act is not just another law. It is civil rights legislation. We have a responsibility to comply with it, and that's one of the reasons why I suggested that we find a way to try to help the Civic Center board. In my memo, since then I saw their cash balances, and it could be that out of that money that they have in cash balance that they might have enough to foot the bill for what is now $50,000 worth of improvements. But in the alternative, the council could today choose to release $50,000 in council contingency, and I think that and then they could seek reimbursement if they wanted to from another source. But I'd really encourage that we keep this issue alive, and I understand that it was not the intent to end the discussion on the issue by tabling it, but I do think it'd be wise to continue this discussion, to get a motion on the floor to take the money out of council contingency, or maybe take it to Monday night to allow other funding sources to be vetted. But I really think that we need to do something, and we need to do something now. And I strongly support addressing this issue. And Richie, I understand and appreciate your concern, but I really believe that we can do this, and we should do this, even though we can't fix the other 400 and some violations right now. That's precisely the line of thinking that has caused us to wait 20 years to address all of these issues, because we put them all in the too hard box and we're not trying to chip away at them. But we have people with real disabilities that are being denied access to events, and that's generating complaints to my office, to the Mayor's Committee for People with Disabilities, and it's going to result eventually, if we're not careful, it's going to result in a civil rights complaint, and that could lead to shuttering of the arena. Let's just be honest about the issue we're facing. And so I would encourage the council to consider releasing the funds, or maybe the Civic Center board can have a meeting between now and Monday and discuss options as well. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Alderman Jerry Wright again.
Then, Mayor, I suggest that your staff and so forth bring to us a better put together program for this, because the issue before us has nothing to do with the council not supporting resolution of issues related to the Disabilities Act. As a matter of fact, I think we unanimously would approve that. The issue is funding. There's no clear identified way of how to pay for this or recommendation from you or your staff. It's put before us for us to make the decision, and it's dissent amongst us as to whether it should come from the Civic Center or from CIP or from vision funds and so forth. I think those are issues. And I do have an issue with this being a spot fix of 402, because the very point I brought up, which you may not have heard, is by creating a situation where we're bringing people into an area with a single lift hoist and concentrating problems in one area without the ability to evacuate them in a disaster is a potential disaster. And I think that their failure to fund the ongoing needs of our facilities is an issue that's been going on in the city for a long, long time. I call it politically budgeting for re-election, and I'm not putting it on you, it's put on all of us that have ever run for elected office in God knows how many years. We need to get to where we are funding our facilities where we don't get ourselves in this kind of trouble. And when I hear from the Civic Center, they barely have enough money to meet their needs, and they hit with a 402 demands, that's some poor planning on our part. And I think we need to work together, and we need a better recommendation to the council for our action. That's the reason we tabled it. That's the reason I made the motion to table. And we've been going through budgeting processes, developing budgeting processes. We're in a third different type of process in 3 years. And really, what we need to do is get really honest about what it costs to run this city and set forth that to the people, and let's vote on it. Thank you. That's why I suggested we table it, and I certainly support what we can do to get the Civic Center back on track.
Chair recognizes Alderman Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mayor, thank you for identifying me and my concerns, and I appreciate that. But if I may respond to it, I support the project. I like the ideas, but unfortunately, based on the popularity contest, that's where I'm concerned, is because if I relied upon a popularity contest, a lot of our streets wouldn't get fixed that need to be fixed, that are driven by water main breaks. And right now, we don't know how many water main breaks are out there at this point, meaning the Civic Center, and raising those issues to a level that we need to prioritize them. Again, I really support what we need to do over there, but we haven't got a plan put together. And the bottom line for me is that I appreciate your bringing forward 3 options for us to consider. And I will take that into consideration as well, but I need to know where these greater issues that need to be addressed first. And in my mind, 2 months will give us an opportune time to come up with a definite plan to address those situations. And I appreciate all the calls that you're getting about this from the public on that. I totally understand and appreciate the position that you're placed in. But again, I would like to rather deal with a plan to move forward in a positive manner than has been suggested here earlier as being a cherry-picking process. So again, I appreciate you identifying me for being concerned about this project, because I truly am. Thank you. I'll yield the floor.
Thank you. And speaking of popularity contest, Chair recognizes Charity Doyle.
One of these days, Mr. Chair, one of these days.
Straight to the moon.
I would love to make the motion to explore securing these funds through Vision. If I could get a second, I would like to retain the floor.
Second.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm going to make that motion with the caveat that I think this is a larger process, because again, if we're servicing more people with the use of this lift, then it draws the need for other accommodations. And I don't know what we have envisioned to actually take care of that. But my question, Mr. Chair, if I may, is for the finance officer. What process would we go through at this point, since this wasn't a previously approved project? How can we make sure all of our ducks in a row and go through this process the correct way to secure these funds for this issue?
Chair recognizes Pauline Sumption. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If my memory serves me correct, I believe in the past, and the project that comes to mind, and I don't know if it really applies to this or not, but was the energy plant that wasn't recommended by the 3 committees or whatever, but the council still chose to do it. I would think that this would just have to go through the council for approval to add the program. I know we have it broken out between the 50%, 25%, 25%, but more than likely this could probably fit in a few different areas, and so it probably wouldn't skew our percentages at all. So it would be a council approval, and then we would have to update the resolution where we approve the projects to be paid.
Okay, and when you say we have plenty in there right now for something like this, you just mean over and above the 50, or you mean addressing the 38 million?
No, not the 38 million, not even close to that. In 2014, the projected amount of cash before we transferred, or the additional 1.5 for the Horace Mann pool, it was right at about 2.5. There's like 30,000. So based on budgets, it would take us below the $1 million that I like to have in the reserve. However, the budgeted sales tax revenue is like $800,000 less than what was actually received in 2013. So I don't have any reservations that we will far exceed our projected revenue for sales tax. So we should be fine to pay the $50,000 out of this.
Thank you, Pauline. And I would be very okay with exploring that. However, I would like to see a companion safety protocol with that, because again, if we're putting more people up in this place, the egress is going to be extremely important in the, God forbid scenario that we do have an emergency. So I think it needs to be a comprehensive approach. Yes, the lift, but here's the safety procedure. Here's what we can do with our limited resources to make sure these people are as safe as possible. Do we need to hire wrestlers, or what do we need to do? Because, there's going to be lifting requirements. There's going to be all these kinds of things. There's going to have to be dedicated space that no one else is going to be able to use or override in the event of an emergency to get these people out. But I think just the lift and just forcing the lift is not responsible when there's a much larger picture to look at. So again, I think I've covered my thoughts. I'm sure we'll be revisiting this quite a few more times. And then as far as Pauline getting this through that process, can we roll this to council? So we're not going to need to put it on a new agenda? Okay.
So clarification, this motion is to fund it out of vision or to explore it? And is there a time frame? Or Pauline, could you please?
I believe the motion was actually to explore, but I think she can amend that. And then what would actually be on the council agenda was to approve this with the funding source being the Vision Fund.
Yeah, that is okay to do that.
Okay.
And just to point out something, we kind of had this discussion a little bit this morning, but the discussion that you guys are having, and if you remember our retreat on the comp plan and Vision Fund and priority-driven budgeting process, you guys are totally verbalizing the reason why the department directors want to go to a priority-driven budgeting process.
Okay.
So if it's not on the list in the future,
Now that we've been taken in the woodshed, Alderman Jerry Wright.
I think we should vote singly on this issue first, and then I'd like to address the safety plan that Charity's talking about.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to take it to council or take it to staff for exploring, or do you want it?
Council
Did you actually amend your own?
Yes.
Did you amend it to?
I need that goes to council.
I never heard anybody formally do that. She made a suggestion, but I'm asking.
I did.
You want to amend your motion to fund the money out of Vision Fund? Okay, and is that okay with the seconder?
Yes.
Okay, so that is the motion that's currently on the floor. Is there any further discussion on funding the lift out of the Vision Fund? No, the motion is to actually use the Vision Fund to fund for up to $50,000. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
It sounds like there's a little bit of confusion over on the other side of you.
Chair recognizes Charity Doyle.
Let me just clarify. The reason I used the word explore is because I believed there to be a process it had to go through, but Pauline, while we were en route with that discussion, said no, it could go straight to council and we could make that decision. So therefore, the process is shorter now. So we'll just be hearing this on Monday.
Okay, so any further discussion? The motion is to use the Vision Fund to fund the $50,000. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
I think I still have the floor. I requested to have the floor. And it's simply as this, that with this action going forward, if the Civic Center would draft a emergency plan for this accommodation and brief your board, your staff, and the council at the nearest future date if possible, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Now, item number 17 is there approved resolution 2014-044 to amend the comprehensive plan by adopting the plan for Rapid City's comprehensive plan with minor language changes as appropriate.
Good afternoon. Patsy Horton, Community Planning and Development Services. We have our consultants here in town, Darcy White with Clarion and Andrew Knutson with EPS Systems, and they're going to give you a brief presentation before we request approval of this resolution or recommend that you recommend approval. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is yours, folks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just some, sorry, I lost my. Oh, thank you very much. We will keep our comments brief. Thank you very much. We're pleased to be here today. It's been just under a year since we started this process. We kicked off the project last May Over that period of time, we have had 5 rounds of meetings with various folks in the community. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Extensive outreach conducted as part of this process, both with the community at large as well as within the city itself. And so in terms of public outreach, we have targeted strategic groups in the community, different established folks in the community, different groups that were already working together, as well as the public at large. And so over that period of time, we had a number of meetings in each of those sessions, and over that period of time, we've been very happy with the level of turnout that we've had, particularly within the last 6 months or so of the process. Since the plan, the initial draft of the plan was completed in December and presented to the community, we've also had ongoing input from a number of folks in the community with specific suggestions for refinements to the plan, so we're very comfortable with the level of input we've received. In particular, wanted to commend Brett and Patsy for their work working with the internal groups, Pauline, as well as all the other groups in the city, to get their input. This has been a very collaborative process within the organization as well as with the community, and that's something we don't often see, and I think really is going to make for a stronger plan that's easier to move forward in the future. In terms of the plan itself, as you know, it's based on 7 core values, and I think the main thing I wanted to touch on here is really that when we started this process, it became clear very early on. There's been a lot of great work that's been done in the community since the last comprehensive plan was adopted. It simply wasn't linked together and unified in any sort of cohesive plan. And so what we've really tried to do is build on the work that's been done, the Vision 2020 strategic plan, all of the specific department plans that have been completed, many of them within the last year, the fire department plan, library plan, civic center plan, et cetera, parks. So we've been working with all of those folks to make sure that while the nitty-gritty details of those plans aren't necessarily in this document, the core values that are associated with those and the policies needed to support them are carefully integrated into this document. In terms of the future land use map, one of the things we were tasked to do was to try to come up with an approach to improve the clarity of the development process with respect to the land use map. And what we've tried to do is balance the need for flexibility. We recognize that there are going to be unknown situations about what happens in different locations. So we've built in a number of more flexible land use categories to allow for different types of uses to occur, say along mixed-use commercial corridors or within different activity centers throughout the community. So the other thing I would mention on the future land use map that was, we believe, a real success was coordination with the Public Works Department on the integration of a unified service, a urban services boundary to guide where infrastructure can be reasonably accommodated and provided within the planning area. So that was a very collaborative effort back and forth. Again, Pat and Bretzi were instrumental in helping that move forward. So we're very comfortable with where we've landed on this. There's been a lot of input into the map. The last thing I'll mention, and then I'm going to turn it over to Andrew for a brief moment, is that anytime you have an ambitious plan of this nature, implementation is going to be key. And I think we spent a lot of time focused on developing specific strategies to move the plan forward. There are timelines associated with those as recommendations to help address things that are ongoing. There are a lot of things that the city is already doing, working with different organizations, establish working groups, et cetera, but also to provide some structure in terms of how the plan moves forward. One of the concerns we heard early on is that we really don't want a plan that's just going to sit on the shelf. And I think with regular amendments and monitoring of this plan, we feel that this is something that can be, incremental improvements can be made. Hopefully it will lend itself to increased predictability in terms of what the priorities are for the community moving forward. One of the things we did to help support that prioritization is to call out 7 priority initiatives. And these really trickle through the implementation strategies that are laid out. So by focusing on these 7 core initiatives, a lot of the other actions are really touched as well. So We think this provides some focus and hopefully will support moving the plan forward in an expeditious fashion. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to talk a little bit more about some of the tools that they have helped develop.
Thank you, Darcy. I'm with Economic and Planning Systems, and we're economists, and oftentimes we bring the numbers to the picture. We also, in this case, are bringing some very tactical tools. There is a toolkit at the end of the plan in the appendix, and there's some good news for you, I think. Many times you are approached for money, and Darcy and I have observed this in the last couple of days. The plan has many ways to expand the resources of the city and increase the fiscal pot that you have to work with. There are more than a dozen different concepts in the plan that identify ways that you can, if you will, expand the pie. They're not easy. Some are things that you can change within your purview within the city. Some require work on the state level. All of them are worth pursuing. And we heard right away, I mean, it was in the first morning of our time here working on the plan, about the unfunded capital requirements and the deferred maintenance that was required across the board on all these different city capital improvements. So we knew that was an issue, and as a result, this is a big part of the plan. There's a fiscal analysis, there's peer community analysis, there's ways that you can identify how you can stand relative to your peers and how you can move forward. A couple other things, and then I'll just wrap up my comments, and we're available for questions. One thing to pay attention to, there's a very detailed inflow-outflow model on retail sales. Lots of linked tables that get people like me and my colleagues excited. Pretty dense data. The important data point to remember, more than 50% of your retail sales come from outside the community. To achieve importation of these dollars greater than 50% is rare. Many communities envy that kind of status that Rapid City already has. There's ways to leverage that and things that in the plan that you should consider, but it's a great asset to work with. I will just conclude with one last point, and that is housing. We did get a lot of comments about the need for affordable housing as well as the need to improve the quality of the housing stock. Usually that kind of tension goes in two different directions. And so we were charged with a very tough set of issues. However, I think that the plan addresses the needs of the community and the desires of the community, particularly as it relates to identifying housing needs across a broad spectrum, looking at it from the low end, 30% of AMI homeless needs, all the way up to workforce, 150% of AMI. And each segment along the spectrum has unique needs, and the plan addresses that as well. We're available for questions if you have any, but there's a lot of meat in there. There's a lot of work for implementation. Brett and Patsy were thanking us, not entirely sincerely, about the length of the to-do list that is within this plan, but there's a lot of really good material and hopefully a plan forward that will advance the community.
Thank you, sir. If you please stand for questions just in case, in which I'm sure that we're going to have some here. The chair recognizes Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move to approve the resolution to amend the comprehensive plan. If I may get a second, I'll have a comment.
Second.
Motion by Nordstrom, second by Laurenti. You still have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did have a question posed by a citizen, and I want to make sure everybody understands that public comments are still welcome, even though we've concluded the final. When we get to the point of actually conclusions and everything else, the public will still have an opportunity to give input later on. So we'll do a quarterly update or a biannual update. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, that's correct. It's not quarterly. I think we've got a biannual, along with looking at a more major update every 5 years. So the goal is really that this is a living document. There's always going to be things that emerge that need to be refined, and that's expected with a plan of this nature. So that's absolutely, that would be encouraged.
Thank you. I'll yield the floor.
Thank you, sir. And up next is Jerry Wright.
Well, I always like to use opportunities to educate myself and our community on things. I hear the
Comes a
term
history
affordable
lesson.
housing a lot, and I know that was a big part of the discussion And I have to wonder how, as a council, we can help. And I think the big factor in that is getting jobs in here that will provide wages that people will be paid enough where they can afford the housing. And the other thing is, I think, is it possible that we as a city should be a partner in, I would call it a subdivision type process where we actually invest in the utilities and so forth and fund it through some type of a assessment and allow lots to be built on and sold or whatever. I know it's been done in other places. Is it an option we should look at? And the other thing is on the public financing developing incentive toolbox, which I think is a good thing to have. And I know you've been told by many of us that the amount of funding, or I say the demands far exceed the amount of funding, and the ability or willingness of our community to address that issue is going to be difficult politically. As I said earlier with the accessibility issue at the Civic Center, our community has been reluctant for years to really sit down and come up with the true cost of running our household. And I think it's high time we do that, because and until we do, we're not going to be able to adequately address the need that we have to fulfill our needs of our community. And I think there are issues such as the TIFs and other economic incentives that certainly can be worked on out there, but I think it's going to come down to questions that we as a council will have to decide is how we're going to fund these needs, and are we willing to raise fees or taxes to get it done? And that's going to be a tough question, but I think if we're going to implement some of these needs, we're going to have to be willing to do that. It's called leadership and courage. I hope we have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright, excuse me. Up next is Charity Doyle.
That's one heck of a Freudian slip. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to say that I have had the privilege, opportunity, experience of actually working on these plans, and I just want to say, reviewing this plan, you guys give the word comprehensive a whole new definition. It was amazing, and I applaud your efforts. And then a housekeeping question, if I may, for Mr. Landine or perhaps Maggie. This was approved through Public Works yesterday. I don't know what it would look like on council with a dual approval. Just something to keep in mind. Should we acknowledge it today rather than approve it, or does it matter?
I think you can recommend approval. We'll have to coordinate with Charlene in the finance office just to merge the items and probably just identify that they were either what the recommendation from each committee was.
All right, thank you.
Okay, the motion is to approve. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you Monday night, probably. Okay, up next is item number 18, second reading and recommendation of ordinance 5988 to prohibit certain use of handheld electronic wireless communication devices while driving in the city of Rapid City by adding section 10.12.401 to the Rapid City Municipal Code.
Move to approve.
Motion approved by the Renty, second by Wright. Any no chair recognizes Charity Doyle et al.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chair. Question for Captain Johns, if I may.
By all means.
Thank you. Do you know, how involved were you with this process? And if you can't answer the question, we can certainly roll it to Monday night. But the question is, was broadening it considered? Mr. Roll is not here any longer, but he brought up the point of people driving and eating and talking to people and eating, or driving and all these different things. How broadly was this ordinance thought about?
Thank you. When we discuss this as a point of issue on what is the problem. Right now you have a broad problem in that people are texting and driving. That is the big problem. You don't see a big problem with people reading books in their car and driving. That is an isolated incident.
I've never seen it.
Yeah.
He has the floor.
I have seen people shaving while driving, believe it or not. But that's 1 in a million. That's not the problem. The problem is texting and driving. The problem is the fact that we all have these handheld electric devices that allow us to communicate with people and put a message out to somebody that really doesn't need to have that message right now. That message can wait. And the point is, we're trying to get people's attention to the problem of looking down at your phone and trying to send a message that is not important, that it can't wait until you get to your destination, and can pull over and stop your vehicle.
Okay. And then there was one other question. What are the logistics of this being a primary offense, which I completely support, but as far as really determining what they were doing with the phone, they might have just been looking at the time, or, you know, how, I mean, is it going to be like a DUI assessment? I mean, I've been on enough ride-alongs where you follow the person for a while and kind of see what's going on, but
I believe that issue has been complicated in the fact that you can sit in an intersection and look at somebody next to you, and you can tell whether or not they're texting or trying to make a phone call or looking up a phone number. You can tell when people have two thumbs going at it on the phone, and that light turns green and they're 10 seconds behind everybody else. That's going to be a traffic stop that'll pull them over. The police department has a comprehensive plan ready to go, where we will be pulling people over and addressing them through warnings. I don't see us running out and writing a whole bunch of citations the moment that this becomes an effective ordinance for Rapid City. I see us making stops and educating the public, because the obvious goal here is voluntary compliance with the law. We're asking people to just understand that texting while driving is dangerous. There is not a text message out there that is worth getting into a car crash and hurting yourself or hurting another person. So just wait. Wait until your car is safely in your driveway or your garage or you're at your destination before you send that text message. So I see it as an education campaign far before we start issuing any citations.
okay, thank you.
Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. JJ, if I may get a confirmation on the data that we have getting out there on the number of accidents that are taking place, approximately 1 in 5 or 20% of the accidents that we can tell by, or we have some definitive numbers that says that, well, let me rephrase that. We got a very good guess on how many accidents are taking place because of distracted driving. The number I got was like 21%. So.
I think that information is out there. I don't have that in front of me right now. I know that there were some numbers put together by our accident investigators. But the reality is that the state has never had a component of their crash reports where there's a box to check, was the person texting while driving? Nobody ever admits to that. It's a difficult thing to prove after the fact an accident has occurred, but we can infer in some styles of crashes and some of the elements that lead up to the accident that what occurred is texting by driving. And we do have some people that admit to it, and those people should be honored because they're honest. But the fact is, texting and driving leads to crashes, and we know that. I believe it's underreported, but we do have some data out there that I'm sure the chief will have Monday night.
Thank you. Thank you, Captain. I appreciate that information, because I think that's one of the significant things that has motivated me to support this ordinance as well. So thank you. I'll yield the floor.
Okay. The motion is to approve. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Item number 19 is to approve Resolution 2014-045, authorizing the City of Rapid City to become a member of the Rushmore Regional Railroad Authority and authorizing the mayor and finance officer to execute an agreement creating the authority.
Move to approve.
Motion approved by Nordstrom, second by the Wright. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion carries.
Move to adjourn.
As this is way past our bedtime for this committee, we are adjourned.